So now let's move on to part 2. In part 2, we're just going to set our host names, and then we're going to start addressing stuff. For the host names, first I'm going to get into here and name these things similarly to how they are in our topology diagram. This isn't going to change them in the actual images, so we're going to have to do those manually ourselves anyway. But once I do this, I'll start up their VMs. And we'll actually get to some configuring. Okay, we've got them all booted up now. I've also switched to something called scaled mode in VirtualBox, just because I realized that after the first couple videos I wasn't really happy with the way that my nonlinear editor scales. It results in a lot of text. I think it's hard to read, so hopefully this might be a little bit easier to read. Okay, so let's get into our first VM here. Like that, and as I said before, there's a whole bunch of interesting things you can do with the question mark and tab complete. But first, let's get in configuration mode, and that is just configure. And when you see the pound sign here, that means you're in the configuration shell. And in the configuration shell, mostly you're going to be using the set command, which is right here. And I went through all that trouble and I didn't enlarge it. So here's the set command, and that sets the value of most of your parameters. That's where most of your configuration is done. So let's see. We're going to set, and I believe it's system host name. And right now you see that's VyOS. We're going to set it to R1. Now, one thing that you'll find out right away about VyOS is that it's a stateful router operating system. And what do I mean by stateful? Well, if you're in iOS and you say host name R1, that goes immediately into the running config and automatically your host name is R1. That's not the case here. What happens to happen here is you have to type commit, and that effectively writes to the running config. Now that doesn't mean that it's saved to the configuration file. That requires the save command, and that writes it to config.boot. Now we have this is one of the oddities about VyOS. You can't see that I've changed the host name right away, so let's drop back into the user shell, and once you go back to the configuration shell, there it is. I don't know why that is, but if you do a show config, we should be able to find it somewhere in here. Interfaces console hostname R1. Right up there. Okay. So now I'm just going to jump into the other two routers here, and I'm going to set them as well. Okay, now we're all set. Let's jump back into our lab document. Now we have to create loopback addresses, and the addressing table, if I remember correctly, 10 dot whatever this is, so this is 10.1.1.1, 10.2.2.2, 10.3.3.3. So to set loopback addresses, let's get back into configuration mode here. Actually, let's jump back out here. This is another strange thing. So there are these two shells, VyOS, and a lot of the show commands don't work if you're in the configuration shell, which I find a little bit annoying, but I can understand why they did it that way. So if you do show interfaces, here's our 4 interfaces, Ethernet 0 through 3, and the loopback. There's only one loopback. It's not like iOS where you alias things like loopback 1, loopback 2, loopback 3, loopback 300, and whatever. You have one loopback, and as you can see here, the loopback contains both IPv4, the 127.0.0.1 address, and the IPv6 default loopback, which is :1/128. The way that we assign additional loopbacks is we just assign them to the same interface. So let's get back here. The way you do that is set interfaces, really? Whoops. Yep, it's set interfaces. How about that? Loopback, and that's for Loopback. And here you only have one real option. They say there's a text for a Loopback interface name, but it never works. If you try and set that to Loopback 1, it'll just return error. So you just have to type Loopback, Loopback, and here's your address. We're doing 10.1.1, and unlike iOS, you don't use full subnet masks, decimal type octets, and you don't use wildcards, at least that I've seen so far. You use CIDR notation. And this is a host only, so it's a /32. And I think that's the end of it. Yep. Now you don't have to save after every commit. You can always commit, exit, check what you're doing, then come back. There are a couple ways you do this, like if you're running a whole bunch of configurations at the same time where you might not want to save your commits all at once, but let's just take a look here. Yep, and there's our loopback down here. It's got two addresses, two IPv4 addresses, and the same default IPv6 address. So that's working. Now I'm just going to go configure the other two. Alright, so now we're going to configure the R1 interface to the internet device, and we're going to configure it as a default route, although we don't have a protocol yet, so there's no way to distribute it. But this is just getting us ready to distribute it. This step it seems like it's a little out of place here, but there is a reason for it, and the reason is that this lab document is not specifically for VyOS. It can be used for something like if you're going to hack pfSense, or if you're just going to install Debian kernel, and then download the packages you need. And for that to work, you need to have an internet address. So we're setting up our default route first and making sure that it can ping. And we're using the NAT cloud device, and there's not a whole lot of ways to configure this, so I'm just going to hope that I remember how to do this correctly. And I believe that's the Ethernet 0 interface. So let's see. Set interfaces Ethernet. Yep. ETH0. If you do a question mark here, you can actually see the available interfaces. This is an advantage over iOS. When you have things like, here, I'll show you something. Let's say you want to get rid of that loopback address. Delete interface LOLO address. It actually shows you the only one that you can complete, and if you type 1, you can tab complete it. You can't do that in iOS, and that's pretty cool. Anyway, let's get back to here. And I believe if we do this correctly, we should be able to address a DHCP. Yep. And I think this is how it works. Let's just see. Starting DHCP client. Alright, we have gotten a DHCP address from the NAT cloud, and I'm glad I remembered how that worked. So now we should be tied into my host machine's physical connection. Let's just check. And we can ping out to the internet. And we have name server services. So yeah, this works. That's fantastic. It's a lot easier than I expected it to be. Alright, so now I think we have to set this as a default route, which doesn't matter to this router, but it will matter to everything else once the network is together. So let's see. I think this is set route. Oh, I'm in the wrong shell. Is set route or set IP route? Oh, it's set protocol. So even though technically we're working in static, VyOS still looks at this as a protocol the same as it would look at BGP or IS or OSPF or anything else. So I think we have to go set protocol static route. Is this 32 or is it 0? I think it's 0. This is how you set a static route, a default route. Let's see. Next hop. It's interesting that you see there's like a black hole option in here. This shows that they were really thinking of stuff like service providers when they were putting together Quagga, which is what preceded VyOS. And let's see, do we want to set this up as a next hop router? I thought we could set this to an interface. Let me just look around here for a second. Ooh, I can. They just don't tell you this. So up here, if you look up here, they see the possible completions are basically an IP address. But I just said Ethernet 0, which means that the help file is not complete, but I believe this works. But I'm going to have to add a distance. And I think a distance is 1. That's fine. Distance 1. Oh, that's not a valid value. Okay, well, let me just take a look here. Okay, you know what's odd? I just came back to this and I see that I already have a static route, even though it gave me a failure message here, which is weird. That's just weird. So I have a static 000 via 192.168.122.1, which I believe is the address that this object is assigning to itself. I can't really tell. Yep, I've got one hop to that. So let me see. That's really odd. You know, I'm just going to have to take it on faith that that's going to work. And I will check as soon as I get a routing protocol in place. But meanwhile, let's just move on here. Actually, this has been going on for a while. So we're going to have to pick this up in the next video where we will finish this section. Thank you very much.